Hello. Oh, sure you can do it. Are Australian kids quiet? Hello.
Hello.
That's a bit better. And putting on silly voices too. Good. So my name's Oisín McGann. I know it's an unusual name. It's Irish. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about telling stories and drawing pictures. Just before I get started, can I ask you to put up your hands and tell me what kind of stuff you like to read? And by reading, I include any type of reading. Newspapers, magazines, Facebook, instruction manuals, cereal boxes, road signs. I don't care. What do you like to read? Yes?
I like reading adventure books.
Adventure books, okay, yeah.
Comics.
Comics, like what? Superhero comics or, sorry? Batman comics, okay, what about? Yeah.
Toilet manuals.
Toilet manuals. Are toilets so complicated here that they need manuals? I believe they do. Most Australian toilets just come with a button. Come on, what else? Anybody else? Yes? Yeah. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Okay, yeah. Anybody else? Sorry, I'm blinded by the light here. Yes? Science. Oh, right, okay. Science fiction or science fact? Bit of both, yeah, yeah. Comedy horror. Which one? Rat Runners? Oh, you're very advanced. Yeah, I hear it's brilliant. Anybody else? What else do you read? No. Okay. One of the questions that writers get asked all the time is, where'd you get your ideas? We get this all the time. And I started writing stories when I was very young. I was about 6 or 7. Now, obviously, at the age of 6 or 7, I wasn't very good at writing. I could hardly spell. I wasn't very good at writing sentences. My handwriting was atrocious. My teacher would look at my stories and go, Oisín, I'm sure this is a lovely story if only I could read it. And also, I was a typical boy, so I wrote stories full of action and adventure and violence. I liked violent stories, and I tended to like monsters in my stories. So at the age of 7, a typical story I'd have written would go something like this. Once upon a time, I went to school, and there was an elephant in the yard. And a dinosaur came along and ate the elephant. And I fought the dinosaur, and I won. The end. It took me a long time to write a story when I was 7, so they tended to be quite short. I also, because of when I started writing, I was very young and I wasn't very good at reading, so all the books that I read had pictures. They were full of pictures, and I loved pictures. And so I thought that if you're going to write a story, you had to draw pictures. I thought that was the deal. And some of my favorite writers were also illustrators, guys like Dr. Seuss or Richard Scarry or Beatrix Potter. They were brilliant illustrators as well as writers. So I thought if you're going to write stories, you had to draw pictures. So I would fill exercise books with stories and with pictures. And I was one of those weird kids, you probably know one if you're not one yourself, who made sound effects while he drew. Any of you do that? Or you know somebody? So you imagine like sitting down in a nice quiet class, everybody's working diligently away in school, and then over in one corner you hear so and I was just away in a little world of my own. I had no idea I was making noises. And in fact, I still don't sometimes. So I loved writing stories, and I loved, my first ideas came from the stories that I read and the stuff because I watched too much television, and I loved films. And I love that thing when you're reading a story, and maybe it's late at night, and you're just kind of reading one page after another, and it just keeps compelling you to read, and maybe the wind is blowing against the windows, and you're tucked up in bed, and you're reading by the light of a lamp. And I just loved when I couldn't put this book down. And my mother's told me to go to sleep like 20 times. I just think, a few more pages. One more chapter. Okay, one more chapter. Okay, a couple more pages. Okay, if the sentence ends at the bottom of the page, I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to the next page. And then you end up finishing this book because you couldn't put it down. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. And you've got this bittersweet feeling of, that was brilliant, but now I have to find another one. And I love that. I loved what these stories did for me. And I thought if I could do for other people what these writers did for me, I just thought that would be the biggest buzz. And at the same time, I was a typical boy, and we were growing up in what we would call now a recession. If you don't know what a recession is, you can ask your parents later. I won't bore you with it now. But what it meant was that quite often somebody would start building a house and run out of money, and then they would be left with a half-built house. So we were living in a housing estate full of half-built houses. And a building site is a nightmare for parents, but it's brilliant for kids. And this was back in the day when they didn't secure building sites. They didn't kind of make them safe. They didn't put fences around them. They didn't have kind of guards up on the machinery. There was none of that, right? So all the kids my age, we were out and we were playing on this construction machinery. We were climbing around in these half-built houses. And, we were, when we were playing as boys, we played war because that's what boys do. And we had a lot of mud because we had no roads. And so we would have little bits of wood and we'd pretend they were battleships and we were bombing them in puddles. This is how we got our thrills. We threw rocks into puddles. How cool were we? So some of you guys going, oh, thank God we've got PlayStations. So we would come in and we'd be plastered from head to toe with mud. And you go, Mom, what's for dinner? But one of the biggest thrills was to climb on the diggers because, they just left these things open. And there was one digger, obviously the door didn't lock, and we would climb up into this digger. And one of my friends, he would sit at the steering wheel. The ones with the big shovel on the front and the digger, like the big shovel in the back. One of my friends would sit at the steering wheel, and he would be driving the digger when it went forwards, and I'd be sitting at the controls on the back because when it went forwards, it was a digger, but when it went backwards, it was a helicopter. And we would fly up there, and my other friends would be shooting the zombies who were chasing us. And I tell you haven't lived until you've killed zombies from a flying digger. I tell you, it's just the height of excitement. But this is how I thought stories should be. So when I started writing, I thought stories had to be about big events and action and pace and danger. And, being in a place like this where it was absolutely dangerous. I mean, there was all sorts of things could have hurt us or killed us because, this is what kids do. They seek out things to scare their parents. Hands up if you think your parents are a little bit boring. Yeah. Okay. They're boring because they had you, right? All of a sudden their lives became a lot more serious because all of a sudden they're responsible for another human being's life. I remember when my first child was born, I was thinking, oh my God, this is going to take years. All of a sudden, I have to drive sensibly. I have to stop drinking properly. I have to stop swearing. I have to act like a sensible grown-up. But part of being a kid is finding all this dangerous stuff to do, and it's part of testing yourself and growing. And so I thought the best stories would be things about danger and action, and this kind of stuff. This is the stuff that made its mark on my stories early on. And I didn't write much about emotions because I was a boy, and boys don't have emotions. Boys do stuff. So that was what my stories were made up of. And then later on, I realized that the stories needed a bit more than that. To be really thrilling, they had to affect your emotions. They had to make you happy or sad, excited or scared. And to do that, you had to have good characters. You had to think about what affected people's emotions. And the best way to do that was just to look around. Again, where people ask, where do you get your ideas from? From just looking around. And I learned that you kind of had to watch people. People are the best place to get ideas from. Things that they do, the odd things that they say, and you start to appreciate differences in things and things that are strange or unusual. So I realized it's not just events, it's not just action that makes a story, it's the characters. It's how the characters deal with a challenge and how they're changed by it, how they're changed by these experiences. So I started looking around. I wanted unusual people, unusual characters. So take Australians, for instance. I've been here for a couple of weeks now, and I've been making notes. And in Ireland, kids have to go looking for dangerous stuff. They have to use their imaginations to make monsters. And so they look over at Australia with a sense of wonder because they can't believe that Australian parents let their children outside. As far as they're concerned, living in Australia must be like living in some kind of Hollywood blockbuster disaster movie. They can't be. You guys have more natural dangers than anywhere else on Earth. And yet, not only do you not walk around in a state of constant fear, as a nation, you seem quite cheerful. Kids watch, like we watch Australia on television and go, wow, look at that place. So your seas are filled with box jellyfish and sharks and stonefish and cone shells, Portuguese men of war, mans of war. I'm never sure what the plural of that is. So what do? You engage in as many different water sports as possible. And it's not just your seas that are dangerous. On land, you have the brown snake, the funnel-web spider, the taipan snake. Now that's a snake. And you have more of these creatures in Queensland than anywhere else. So what do? You go on holidays to Queensland. And a group of writers and I are here for a project from various different countries. So they decided to take us up to Queensland because it's a very dramatic place. And we were taking a tour through the rainforest in Daintree. And the guide, our tour guide, was telling us about, I should say that at points I'm going to be attempting an Australian accent. I apologize now, right? It's just part of the thing. Go with it. So she was telling us about the taipan snake. And these were her exact words. The taipan snake will kill 100 men with one bite. How does it do that? I can understand how it killed the first guy. That's straightforward. How does it kill the other 99? That's a dangerous snake. Mark my words, somewhere the Australian army is trying to figure out how to make a gun that fires taipan snakes. And it's even normally, this is the thing, even normally harmless creatures become a major problem when they reach Australia. Take the lowly rabbit, for instance, right? Now, in Ireland, the rabbit is the born victim of the natural world, right? Every other animal in Ireland kicks the rabbit's ass. And then in 1859, some guy comes over and he releases a bunch of rabbits into his land here in Australia. 20 years later, 2 million acres of grass and vegetation rendered wasteland by that weapon of mass destruction known as the rabbit. I mean, seriously, you guys have more dangerous creatures than any other place on Earth, and not one of them eats rabbits? So, anyway, in Ireland, we figure the Aussies have to be you're all sports mad. And we think you must be sports mad because you guys have to be able to move fast at any given moment. You seem to be on alert all the time. And this extends to even when you're just crossing the street. I go out across the street. When the green man tells me to cross, I wait. I do what I'm told, right? I'm halfway across the street. The red man is suddenly blinking at me going, come on, come on, come on. And he's looking like, there's an old person there. Are you old? Look, have you got a walking stick? Too bad, we are weeding out the weak. Move it. It's like you have to be ready for action at any moment. But actually, the real danger is not all the lethal animals, although they're dangerous enough. Your real danger, the real monster, is the weather. Your very environment is out to get you. You can't go in the outback because you get sunburnt to death. You can't go in the sea because riptides will drag you out to sea. Harold Holt, one of your prime ministers, who presumably was the most protected person in your country, went for a swim and the sea swallowed him whole. He died swimming, so what do the Australians do? You name a swimming pool after him. I love that. That's brilliant. And it doesn't stop there because it gets so hot and dry here that your grass spontaneously bursts into fire. Bushfires are so common here, you get text message updates. And then there are the cyclones, because there wasn't enough dramatic weather. And we were up in Daintree, and we saw there had been a cyclone a couple of weeks ago, and we saw how it had smashed through the forest. It knocked down these giant trees, tore them up by the roots. And so much rain fell on the hills that the rivers weren't just running under the bridges, they were running over the bridges. I swear, honestly, between the floods and between all the swimming they do off the Great Barrier Reef, Queensland should have a snorkel in its flag. But so our guide pointed to this 2-story house, and she said, the water reached up to the first floor window. And I was thinking, hang on a second, this is crocodile territory. You actually live in a place where conceivably a crocodile could swim through your bedroom window. And all this extreme weather, of course, is going to get much worse as climate change continues to affect us. And yet still you have some Australians going, this weather's not bad enough yet, we need to burn some more coal. And you're not even safe in the cities, because you can be there, snug and safe, thinking this is all very civilized, and then a sandstorm of red dust blows in over the city, obscuring the sky, blocking out the sun, making you feel like you're living on Mars. And this has happened because the soil has dried up and eroded and turned to dust because there's no grass or vegetation to keep it together because of the rabbits. And I was on ABC radio the other day. Lindy Burns was interviewing me, and she goes, where'd you get your ideas? Look where you're living. So the dramatic stuff is a great way to get stories, but actually sometimes you have to bring it back to earth. And and when I was your age, maybe a bit older, I loved horror, right? And I loved horror stories, horror films, big gruesome things, a bit of blood and gore and violence. Some of you are getting to that age. The thing about horror is, what you're trying to do is you're trying to have an effect on your reader. You're trying to affect their emotions. You're trying to scare them or give them shivers. And one of the ways to do that, or the best way to do that, is to find stuff that they can relate to. Because if you want to affect emotions, you have to kind of figure out, well, what affects my emotions? What scares me? How do I kind of get under somebody's skin? And horror, horror will use all sorts of kind of gruesome and graphic stuff. But actually, sometimes it's not the big stuff that affects you the most. Let's take a typical horror scene, right? Say, okay, so you got some woman, a gorgeous girl, lovely hair, running down this corridor, right? And there's an axe murderer after her, right? And he's chasing her, and she's screaming her head off, and she's running down really long corridor. And she's trying one door after another, and they're all locked, and she's running, and her boobs are bouncing up and down, and the eye's coming after her like this with the axe. And she's screaming her head off, and it seems to be taking forever. And she finally reaches the end of the corridor. She throws open the door, and it's a cupboard. And the guy comes and he chops her head off, and there's blood everywhere. And that's fine. But it's not something you can relate to. It's not something you can kind of go, oh, I hate when that happens. One thing I can guarantee is nobody here has ever had their head chopped off, right? You don't get, oh, I hate it. God, it makes such a mess. So when you're looking for ideas, normally it's the stuff close to home. Normally it's just the ordinary stuff around you that gives you the best ideas. So I'll give you another example. A friend of mine was, years ago, he was a mechanic. And he was working on his own car out in the garden. And the wind caught the door of the car and it slammed it shut on his finger. And it took off the top of his finger. Now it took off the flesh, but left the bit of bone sticking out, right? And he kept his head. Now, that's a reaction. You see? I could talk about chopping somebody's heads off and you go, yeah, grand. A little fingertip, ugh! But that's because you can imagine losing a fingertip, can't you? It's almost like something you have to do in your childhood. Oh, there's a door. I haven't caught my finger in the door yet. I'm 4 years old. That's a life experience I haven't. I must go over there. It's windy, So he gets the top of his finger chopped off by the door, and he keeps his head, right? He says he's careful, he wraps it in plastic, puts it in some ice, takes it to the hospital, and he's saying to the doctor, can you save my fingertip? I'm a mechanic, I need my hands, what can you do? And the doctor says, don't worry, we'll do what we can. I just need you to look at the eye chart. And he's going, what are you talking about, the eye chart? My eyes are fine, the finger's the problem. I have no fingertip, look. Anyway, the doctor says, just trust me. Just look over at the eye chart. And they gave him some drugs, and he felt very good. He said, just look over there at the eye chart and start reading down the letters. So he's going, yeah, okay. Starts reading the letters. And the doctor, he takes a pliers, and he cuts off the piece of bone. Because they couldn't sew a flap of skin over the bone while it was there, so they couldn't save the fingertip. So they had to actually just kind of sew it up as it was. And that is something that has much more effect on somebody than describing somebody getting their head chopped off, because you can imagine it happening. I'm sure some of you have already caught your fingers indoors or hit your thumbs with a hammer. Or maybe hands up here if you've ever stubbed your toe. Everybody stubbed their toe. And there's something particularly stupid about stubbing your toe. Because it's something we do to ourselves. Nobody else stubs our toe for us. So when it happens, and so personally, the thing I've stubbed my toe most on is the leg of my own bed. And it's not like my bed moves around trying to catch me, I'm just walking past my bed and it'll be suddenly bang! Ah! Ah! And not only is it incredibly painful, but it really feels stupid. You've managed to do this to yourself. I once split my own toe open by stubbing it. So then I was feeling stupid, I was in incredible pain, and I was bleeding on the floor. But again, that's something people can relate to because everybody's done it. And then when you're looking for ideas for stuff, that's the stuff you look for, because you think, well, if that affects me, then it'll affect other people. And I love that kind of stuff. So that's mostly where ideas come from, and they come from just ordinary things you see every day. So other things that would give you ideas could be anything at all. This book here, Rat Runners, that came from one very simple idea. And it was the idea of being stared at. Because nobody likes being stared at, you know? Because it's a little bit unsettling when somebody starts staring at you. It makes you a bit uneasy, particularly if their eyes are just a little bit too wide. It's a bit intense, you know? And you're thinking, why isn't he blinking? Blink, for the love of God. Blink, what are you doing? And it's quite challenging. It's kind of an animal thing. You don't, it's intense. You don't, and it's bad enough when somebody's talking to you, but it's even worse when somebody doesn't talk and they just stare. And I remember that, and you guys actually, you may not think it, but actually you're being stared at more than any other generation before you, because you're under constant surveillance now. We have cameras, and there's cameras in this room. We have cameras all around us, and we're letting them into our lives more and more. We're kind of giving up our privacy. And I remember just thinking this idea of being, you know, people being stared at. Nobody likes it. Everybody can relate to that. I thought, what if for every camera we had around this place, what if you had a person whose job it was just to stare at you? Imagine this was kind of a low-tech society when they didn't have technology. So instead, they say, right, we're just going to hire people to stare. They're going to watch, they're not going to say a word, and they're going to report back. Right? And you can imagine for every security camera in this city, there was a person. Maybe he's got goggles on or a mask, and you can't see his face, and he just watches. And that would be a little bit unsettling. And I thought, well, how could I make that worse? Because when you're trying to write a story, you're always trying to crank up the tension. You kind of tighten the screws. You think, how could I make that worse? You know, and of course, some of you guys are getting to that age where, you know, when you walk past a police car, you're thinking, am I doing anything illegal? Or you go into a shop and the shopkeeper's going, what are you doing there? Can I help you? And you're going, I'm not stealing anything. I'm just looking. Now I'm going to have to buy something just to prove that I'm not going to steal it. So what if you had these guys, what if it was a high-tech society? What if they had cameras, maybe X-ray cameras, so they can see through into your bones. They can see what you're carrying in your pockets. They can see the fillings in your teeth. And I thought, yeah, how could I make it worse? Maybe they have thermal vision so they can look through walls and watch you moving around inside your house. What if they have long-distance microphones so they can pick up a conversation 100 meters away? That's something your teachers would love to have. What if they have chemical analyzers that can analyze the smell of your sweat and tell you what you had for dinner? And I thought, that's creepy. But it's not creepy enough. I thought, how can I make it worse? Well, what if they don't just stand there? What if they can follow you? You're walking down the street and you pass one of these things and it goes, and it starts walking after you. And you're thinking, what's going on here? And he's not following you because you're doing anything wrong, but simply because it's your job to be followed. Or it's your turn to be followed, sorry. And I thought, well, that's quite creepy. But it's not creepy enough. What if these guys didn't just follow you? What if they could show up at your house? What if they knocked on the door? You have to let them in because that's the law. You have no privacy. You have no right to privacy anymore. These things come into your house. They can stand there watching you eat your dinner. They can stand there watching you sleep. They can stand there watching you go to the toilet. Now that's creepy. And actually, that was creepy enough. And that was a simple idea for Rat Runners came from that. And it was, once I had that I thought, well, is that going to be the challenge? Is that going to be what they have to overcome? Do they have to bring down this society where there's all this surveillance and cameras watching them? I thought, well, actually, no, because what people can relate to nowadays is the fact that there are cameras around us all the time. Not only are there cameras around us, we carry cameras with us and we surveil ourselves. Look where I am! I'm going to take, how vain have we become wherever we have to go? We have to take a picture of ourselves there. Look, I'm in this famous, look, the Great Barrier Reef with my head in the middle of it. I'm in one of the greatest wonders of the world, and most of what you can see is me smiling. So I thought, what if I just have a crime story? I'm going to make it a crime story. I'm going to set this crime story in this place. And then this is just normal. It's normal that there's this surveillance. I thought, well, in that, then how do you work the characters in? How do you give the kids the advantage? Because when you're writing a kid's story, you need the kids to have an advantage, because you can't just have parents showing up and being responsible. Not in the kids. Have you ever noticed you have to get rid of the parents? Yeah, they have to be eaten by a rhino, kidnapped, or disappear, or something's got to happen to the parents, because the kids have got to solve their own problems. You can't be kind of chasing after a bank robber, and your dad pulls up in the car and goes, "You in the car now." Your mother's furious. You haven't eaten your dinner. You're supposed to have your homework finished, and you're going, "I'm catching a bank robber in the car." You think that doesn't make a good end to a book. So you have to give the kids an advantage. I thought, what if these kids, the heroes of the story, what if they're professional criminals? And maybe they have an advantage because you can't be followed by these safeguards, these strangers with the cameras, until you're 16. They're not allowed to follow children. And all of a sudden, the kids then have a big advantage over adults. And also criminals have a reason to have kids around, because these kids are fast on their feet. They can run across, jump across buildings, and they're like couriers and little thieves. And I thought that's the start of a story. And all that came from staring and cameras and this kind of unsettled feeling we have. This one, Small-Minded Giants, again came from a very simple idea. I just thought, when you go out into the city all the time, we don't really notice how everybody's just getting on with stuff. We don't realize how important it is for somebody just to show up and do their job. The tram drivers have to show up, bus drivers, people showing up. We all kind of counter that. We don't think of it. I thought, what if that was like a machine? What if you literally had to show up because you were part of a machine? What if your normal life was helping keep everybody alive? So in Small-Minded Giants, it's a frozen world, and just people going to school, they're going one direction. Say you get in a tram and you go one direction. That helps generate electricity, keep the city warm, because the whole city sits on top of a machine. And again, it was ordinary stuff. Ordinary stuff. That's where we get the best ideas. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a picture. If you have any questions, if you want to put up your hands, I'll just look around. I was going to say somebody else can pick them out. Or actually, is Seb here? Seb, can you pick them out? Grandad seeing out of his nose. I didn't. Is that one of my books? If it isn't, it will be. No, I don't think that's one of my books. There's a Mad Grandad story, but I don't know if he's seeing out of his nose. Although I remember when I was your age, and I can't remember, it was some club I entered. The way you kind of send off these clubs, and you get, notebooks or whatever. And one of the things was strangest talent. And I thought, well, my strangest talent is the ability to breathe out through my eyes. Which I was convinced I could do if I hold my nose tight enough, that if I blew, I could breathe out through my eyes. And that went on. I'd heard somewhere that if you hold your nose and try to keep your mouth closed when you sneeze, your eyes could pop out. Did you ever hear that one? I haven't tried it. Now, when I draw, what I would normally do, I should say, is I would start off with a pencil and I would draw lightly. Why do I draw lightly with a pencil? Yes? So I can erase. Very good. Do you not say rub out? Erase. That's very impressive vocabulary. Yes, so you can erase, or indeed, as we say, you just rub it out. Yes, and I am a professional illustrator. I've been illustrating things for years, a commercial artist, and I still make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. And part of drawing is, or an element of drawing, is that you're always drawing something new. You're always trying something that you've never done before. And part of doing new stuff is making mistakes, because if you haven't done it before, you're going to make mistakes. So I will always start off a picture, even a book for, no matter how big a picture is going to be for a book, we'll always start off nice and loose and nice and sketchy with a pencil. Having said that, if I drew with a pencil on this, you wouldn't be able to see it. So I'm actually going to have to start off with a marker. But I will start off in a kind of sketchy way and show you how I build it up. I do what's called construction. And that means that rather than try and draw just an outline straight on, you guys, I'm sure, you've art programs on telly where they draw with a marker? Yeah? Where people draw on telly? Oh, yeah, draw, yeah, sure. And what happens most of the time is they just draw straight on and they don't make any mistakes. Have you ever noticed that? And I always think it's a bit of a shame because it makes it look like that's how you're supposed to draw, and it's not. You're not supposed to draw without making mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes as they start drawing. So I'm going to try and make it look a bit sketchy. And yeah, because when they draw on telly, it's a bit like a magic trick or a dance. They've prepared it. They will have drawn that picture many times over just to make sure they can do it in one go. But I always think it's a bit of a shame because it kind of gives a bad impression of drawing. Having said that, here I am about to draw with a marker on the page. So start off nice and light. What am I drawing? Oh, yeah. Always know what you're drawing before you start. Particularly if you're standing in front of a crowd. This is very important. So I'm going to draw one of the safeguards from Rat Runners. Now, if you have any questions, please still put up your hands and Seb will pick you out. And I'll answer questions while I draw. Or I can just talk. In analog? Do I draw in analog? I believe I do draw in analog most of the time. Yes, magnetic strips. No, most of the time I use paper and pencil. Now, I wouldn't really do a lot of, we're going to get technical now. I don't do a lot of commercial work anymore. I mostly just illustrate my own books. So I have a certain amount of luxury in that I can do it my own way. If I was still doing work for other people, I would probably be using the computer a lot more. Now, I do use Photoshop. I've used Photoshop for years. But I use it to touch up pictures and tweak them. I don't really use it for original artwork. I draw a picture in and draw a picture first and then scan it in. But I think that the tools for drawing are getting very good. But I do think you really should start off with the basics. Start off with pencil, pens, and it's very easy. Just kind of hit Control Z and undo it all. And you really have to get in the habit of being able to draw it in one go. So. But yeah, like I said, if I was a commercial, if I, for instance, was doing a lot of work for advertising, I'd use a computer. But it's nice when when most of the time it's for my own books, so I can pretty much do what I like. Draw an analog. I have to remember that one. So I'm keeping it nice and sketchy. And these guys they're very creepy. They're made to look as unhuman as possible because they don't want you thinking that there's a human inside the suit. What they want is you to think that this is just a moving security camera. Because that's one of the things that struck me about security. We don't worry about cameras. You can pass a camera and not think about it. But if you had an eyeball on the wall, that would make you think. Particularly if it was kind of moving around following you, And yet this is effectively what cameras are. It's like an eyeball staring at you the whole time. But because it's a glass lens, we don't think of it that way. Any other questions? Yeah. They can't draw. And what age are they? Nobody at 6 that can draw a horse. Horses are hard. I was a professional illustrator before I could draw. I actually got a commission for 4 history books. And it was only after I started the job I realized, hang on a second, I can't draw horses. And history's full of them. And not only that, but history is full of horses and crowds. And sometimes they're crowds on horses. I was kind of off. One of the editors I was working with offhand mentioned that I had to draw the Battle of Hastings, and the Battle of Hastings is men in chainmail on horses. Yeah, horses are hard, and I would say I was talking to a woman last night, and she said, "Oh, I can't draw. I hate it." And I'm thinking, yeah, but you could learn now. And actually, as you get older, you get better drawing automatically because you've been looking at the world more. You know how things work. You've been looking at faces and taking all this stuff, and your brain is automatically better at it. And I really have a problem with the way drawing is taught, that it's, first I think it should be taught as a language, because I think it's that important. It's the only language that everybody can understand innately. And the other thing is that people particularly around the age of about 10 or 12, start getting into their heads that, oh, he can draw and I can't, therefore he's an artist, I'm not, and I'll never be able to draw. And I really do hate that attitude, because it's, anybody can learn to draw. Anybody can learn to draw. And some people might be better at it than others, but it's a very basic skill. And once the techniques are once you've got some basic techniques and you can draw simple shapes. Who was it? Somebody said that they liked Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Was that you? Jeff Kinney can't draw. He'll admit this. I've been to his talks. He can't draw. He admits this himself. But he's a good illustrator. And he's an illustrator because he's able to draw symbols of things. And it's the symbols we understand. You know, if I draw a crescent moon, you know that means nighttime. If I draw a little man in a rectangle, you know that means toilet. Actually, one of the things about being a commercial illustrator was that you're made to draw things you couldn't draw before. Like I said, like horses. And it's amazing how, because I grew up wanting to draw dragons and spaceships and submarines and stuff. And then somebody goes, right, we need you to draw a toilet. And toilets are hard to draw. So it was great discipline because somebody else was making me draw these things that I hadn't tried to draw before. And I think that's what we need. You just need to kind of say, no, everybody's going to be able to draw. It's just that simple. We're not going to decide whether you want to be an artist or not, or whether you think you have the talent. No, because it's a skill. It's a skill like being able to speak or being able to write. It should be that transferable. And I think it is. We just have to treat it that way. So I've made this gleam too big. Never mind. So kind of start off like that, and just blocking in bits of black helps kind of give it a bit of shape. Any other questions? No. That's all right. That's all right. I don't bite. At least you're not when you're that far away. Yeah, go ahead. Well, there's, I don't know, some ideas will work in one thing and then may not work in another. Or sometimes you'll get an idea and you'll say, oh, I could make it like a short book out of that, or a small picture, and you think, actually, I could use that idea somewhere else as well. And it's amazing how often you can think you've got this brilliant idea and you start bringing it into a story and you realize, oh, hang on a second, I've actually written this before. So sometimes an idea feels brilliant but doesn't fit into the story or doesn't fit into the picture. And I think, when people talk about, for instance, writer's block, I don't believe in writer's block. People talk of it as if it's some kind of psychological affliction. I think what happens is people get too caught up with an idea and think this has to be the idea and then can't let it go and take themselves too seriously or think they're trying to create some great artistic work. And I think you have to be flexible and just kind of say, right, that's not working here, just put it away, put it somewhere else. And sometimes you'll come back to it much later. So one of my books is called Wired Teeth. And it's kind of, I was a big Roald Dahl fan, so I have a few books called The Forbidden Files, which are kind of Roald Dahlish. And one of them was when I was about a bit older than you guys, I was about 13, and some of the people I knew started getting braces. And, it's very common. Loads of people get braces. It's very ordinary. But as teenagers do, people started spreading rumors. And one of the rumors that went around was that you could pick up radio signals on your braces. which I thought was a brilliant idea. I thought, wow, imagine you could do that. Imagine you could pick up like ABC radio on your teeth. I thought, what if that happened by accident? So all of a sudden you start hearing these voices coming out of your mouth, but they're not your voice. And then I thought, what if they were secret signals you're not supposed to hear? And that idea just sat there for years. I'd forgotten about it. And then one day I wanted, because this is, when I was a teenager, and then it was in my, I think it was my late 20s. And I wanted to write a certain type of book. And all of a sudden, bang, there it was again. And this time, there was a place for it. And I think sometimes you have to, there's a thought when you're working creative work that sometimes you just have to stop trying to get it and let it come to you. It's like breathing. There's a point, there's a pause point. And I think sometimes people get too worked up and try and chase the ideas when actually, if you just stop for a second and go, what's going to fit here? I think that's sometimes where those things will come back to you. I make copious notes. I fill notebooks with notes, but I don't actually read back through them a huge amount because it's part of the filing system. It's part of a memory exercise for me. And I find if I just kind of keep the notes and go with it, my brain sorts that stuff out. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you come up with a brilliant. It's very hard. Sometimes I can't remember who came up with the line. You have to kill your darlings, not your children. But sometimes you have a brilliant idea, and sometimes you just have to let it go because it's not the right idea. I'm not sure if that answers your question at all. Sorry. Yes. It does sometimes. In publishing, generally, you write first and illustrate after. So, for instance, if somebody else is illustrating a book, then the writer writes first and the illustrator illustrates afterwards. If you're a writer-illustrator, sometimes you're scribbling stuff down and you draw something, and that gives you an idea. I would still naturally kind of tend to write first, simply because a lot of the time it's quicker to write down an idea than draw it. But other times, a drawing is the only way to do something. So, yeah, sometimes I'll be drawing something and I'll go, oh, God, that's an idea for a story, or often a character. Or you'll see something, see something and you sketch it. See, the problem is we all have cameras now, so instead of sketching stuff now, I just take a picture. But, yeah, quite often it'll be something like that. I'll give you an example. Let me see. Well, Mad Grandad, actually. My most popular character in Ireland for my younger kids' books is Mad Grandad. And he just came, I think, years ago, or a couple of years before I tried to write the books, I drew this character with big wings of hair and big square glasses and a bald head and eyebrows floating up over his head. And there was, I don't think he wasn't the finished version. I think when I came to sketch him later, he changed. But that stuck in my head. And basically what had happened was he was a combination of a bunch of old guys I knew. So there's one old guy, and he was slowly sinking into his trousers. His trousers were up here. And there was another guy. Have you ever noticed how old men's ears just keep growing? It's a big saucer for ears. You guys can have a good laugh now. It'll happen to you too. And frankly, and you want to lay off the junk food as well, because your arse is going to be this big if you keep it. Yeah, it's... That was one where, but to be honest, people ask, for instance, which do I prefer, writing or drawing, and it's very hard for me to separate them out because for me they're two sides of the same coin, and I sometimes have no idea which came first with an idea, whether I scribbled something down or whether I came up with an idea and was thinking of it while I drew it. So that could be a case where I had the image in my head before I had the words. And in fact, I remember in our college, a guy asking us, he came to talk to us, I can't remember what it was about, but he kind of challenged basically how to get art students riled up. He said that we think in words rather than pictures, and of course this got everybody up in arms. Yeah, I think for the most part, we think in pictures first. So even when you're trying to find the words for it, you've got the picture in your head. But sometimes words are a quicker way of getting it down, you know. So these guys, their arms are covered up. They're literally like a cloaked figure, and they move around. They're taught to move in a certain way. They glide, so they don't look human. Any other questions? Sorry? They aren't or they are? For young adults. Yeah. Where are they gone? They're the books. Yeah, I mean, I think young adult is a problematic term. And in fact, categorization in general for children is a problem, because I don't mind when you're in the business and we talk about categories, because we have to. We have to talk about not just reading level, but subject matter. You know, there's certain things we're not allowed to talk to you about yet. You can go looking on your own if you want, but we're not allowed to say it to you. That's what curiosity is all about, guys. But yeah, so we have to kind of manage this in the book industry. But I do think the young adult thing is slightly false. For me, the whole definition of a young adult is a book that both young and adult readers will enjoy. People get caught up with the idea that it's only for teenagers, which is, I think, a bit daft, because actually the reason that young adult books became huge was not because teenagers read them, it was because everybody read them. And speaking as somebody who works in that market, one of the best things about young adult is that the story rules. Whatever you want to do with your book, whatever it is, has to be second to the story. So you can write, and I quite often like writing about big themes, but it has to be the story, the pace has to come first. And I think that's really the only definition of young adult. People keep telling us what young adult is, and I think certainly when I was a young adult, as opposed to an old one, I went from Hardy Boys and Famous Five to adult thrillers, Stephen King and other stuff. So there wasn't this bridge between those things. So I think just adults looking for a good story. And I love with the Harry Potter books that they put an adult cover on the Harry Potter books. I just thought that was so funny. You're talking about the most famous children's book in the world, and we go, "Who are you kidding? You know, is this just so you can read it on the train?" With the words Harry Potter across the top, with your kind of moody cover. I think, what? Come on. So yeah, I think. Well, to answer your question, yes, I write young adult books. Sorry, that was probably a long, drawn-out answer for. Some of my books, by the way, are labeled unsuitable readers, which for me, when I was young, or unsuitable readers, unsuitable for young readers. For me, when I was a young reader, that was the kind of book I went looking for. So if it's on the back, if it says unsuitable for young readers, it's a young adult book, and you guys will have to go and find it yourselves. Or your parents can buy it and go, look, just don't tell your mother. So anyway, basically my kind of measuring stick for young adult is if it's on primetime television, I can put it in a book. And that's actually quite a big scope. So, yeah. Anybody else there? That's a good question. I had a really good teacher in 5th and 6th class. I'm not sure when I was about 11, 12, for last 2 years in primary school, and she made quite a big deal of my writing. She was really nice about it, and nicest thing somebody's ever said about me was, or one of the nicest things was, she said, I read the other children's stories. She told this to my parents. I read the other children's stories, and I sit down with a cup of coffee and read Oisín's. And I thought, that's what I want. I want somebody to sit down with a cup of coffee and read my stories. And that was it, you know. So that's still better than any award you could get, or that's all you ask for, really, when you're a writer, is people do that. And in fact, one of the another teacher recently, a few years back, about my Mad Grandad stories, she said, what were the words? She said, boys who can't be persuaded to read are fighting over the Mad Grandad books. And I was like, That one made me cry. I don't know. Yeah, so I suppose that age, that's when I started getting serious about it. But then I hit secondary school, and it was all essays rather than stories. So I think that kind of, it may be more analytical and more deliberate in technique, but it also kind of killed off the creativity for a little while. And it took me a while to get back up to it. And then once I started writing professionally, then of course you're very conscious. Particularly, I think one of the definitions of a children's writer is that you have to think about your reader, because they're so different. They vary so much. Some writers say, "Oh, I don't think about my reader." I think, well, that's very selfish, isn't it? Because it is a conversation. You're trying to link with somebody. But I think, yeah, in terms of thinking about an audience, thinking about, well, probably just one reader at a time at that age, it was probably about 11 or 12. Anybody else? We have a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to finish up. I should say to everyone in Australia, but that might be a bit... Now, this is the problem with being professional writers. People assume you can spell. Melbourne, B-O-U, isn't it? Yes. So, any last questions before I finish up? I'll be leaving the country, so you won't get another chance. Going, yes. Thank you for that lead in, Tony. Yes, we have. Yeah, I mean, I have to say I've found Australia, as you probably gathered from part of the talk, fascinating. I love the big dramatic stuff. I love all the tiny little differences as well. I love that when you're in Melbourne and you want to take a right-hand turn into your car, you have to go left and wait and pick the furthest point away from where you're actually going. When in Ireland, when the green man is up there, that means you have the right to go. That doesn't mean that cars are going to come from behind you and just turn whenever. So I love stuff like that. I've filled a notebook while I was here, and so I'm working with 4 other writers, one from Poland, one from Australia, Tony there, Mirko from Germany, and Zhao Lu, who's Chinese but from London, and we're working on a project that's looking at telling stories about climate change. So we're all contributing to a blog called Global Weather Stations. And that's one of the reasons we started off here was because everything is so dramatic and, it's so affected here. So there's tons and tons of ideas I've got from this place already. Definitely be coming back. But no, it's been excellent. And it's, I wouldn't say one character, there's been loads. Because there's, you only have to look around. Anybody else? Yes. Yes. It was part of it is a function. So the idea that he's impersonal. So you look through this smoked glass, and instead of seeing a face, you see cameras. The whole thing does look cold and impersonal, and I've grown up with science fiction and strange mystery stories and that, and I love these kind of this idea that these cloaked figures just stand and stare at people. I just think that very, very spooky. I think if you dressed up a camera to make it look like a person, that would make you think about what this camera was doing. Or if you just had a person whose job it was to stare. I don't know what it's like here, but we were starting to put cameras in schools. And in the UK, it's worse. Some of the schools in the UK look like prisons because they have big electronic gates and like razor wire at the top of them. So. And I just think we're not going to a good place. I think I understand the need for public cameras, but the whole giving up of privacy and I think we're all contributing to it. I don't think it's all big government conspiracy either. I think we're developing this culture. So that was just my thought. I thought if you made a camera look like a person, we'd think twice about what we did in front of it and whether we'd want them around. Anybody else? No, well, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the session.